America just crossed a number that sounds almost impossible: $40 trillion. That's how much debt the US government now has. And here's the part most people miss. The scary part isn't simply the number, it's what happens when the government has to keep borrowing money at today's interest rates. Let me show you what's actually happening. On August 19th, the US national debt officially crossed $40 trillion for the first time. Just 1 year earlier, it was about $2.9 trillion lower. That's an enormous increase. But before we panic, there's something important to understand. That $40 trillion isn't one giant bill sitting on someone's desk. It's the accumulated debt of the federal government. And it comes in two major pieces. About $32.3 trillion is debt held by the public. The rest is money the government owes to other government accounts. So who is actually lending America all this money? Investors, banks, pension funds, mutual funds, foreign government, and millions of Americans who indirectly own Treasury securities through their investments. And here's where the story gets interesting. Borrowing itself isn't automatically a disaster. The US has been running deficits for decades. The real problem is the cost of carrying that debt, because every time the government borrows money, it eventually has to pay interest. And those interest costs have become enormous. Treasury data shows federal interest expense has already reached about $1.17 trillion in fiscal 2026 year to date. That's money the government has to spend simply servicing existing debt. It doesn't build a new road. It doesn't create a new program. It doesn't buy a fighter jet. It's the cost of borrowing. And there's another problem. A large amount of government debt has to be refinanced over time. If new Treasury bonds are issued at higher interest rates, the government's borrowing costs can rise. And that's exactly why bond yields matter. Right now, investors are demanding higher returns to lend money to the US government. Higher Treasury yields don't just affect Washington. They can influence borrowing costs across the economy. Mortgage rates, business loans, auto loans, and other forms of credit can all be affected by broader market interest rates. So, a $40 trillion debt number can eventually become a personal finance story. But here's the part that gets overlooked. The US isn't suddenly unable to pay its bills because the debt crossed $40 trillion. Treasury securities remain central to the global financial system, and investors continue to buy US government debt. The issue is the long-term direction. If deficits remain large and interest costs keep rising, more of the federal budget can eventually go towards servicing debt instead of other priorities. That's the real concern, and the timing matters. The Treasury is already taking steps in the bond market, including expanding its buyback operations. But buybacks don't solve the underlying budget deficit. They can help manage the Treasury market. They don't erase the debt. So what happens next? There are basically three paths. The government can raise more revenue, it can reduce spending, or it can continue borrowing and hope economic growth eventually makes the debt burden easier to manage. None of those choices are easy. And that's why $40 trillion matters. Not because America is about to collapse tomorrow, but because the cost of maintaining this debt is becoming harder to ignore. For ordinary Americans, the lesson is simple. You don't need to predict a financial crisis. You need to understand how higher government borrowing costs can filter through the economy. Because when the world's biggest borrower pays more to borrow, the consequences don't necessarily stay in Washington. They can eventually reach your mortgage, your business, your investments, and your paycheck. America just crossed $40 trillion in debt. The bigger question isn't, can America survive $40 trillion? It's, how expensive will the next trillion become? Subscribe for more simple breakdowns of the American financial system.